Dear Guy McPherson, I was looking forward for this day. Thank you a lot for joining me. Me and all viewers are waiting for this interview about your book that you written a long time ago, and it's the second edition that I'm holding right now, called Going Dark. I know how much grief you have for the planet, for our habitat, for all species that we share this planet with. And this book just put a huge impact into my life. I cannot describe you. Normally, when I read a book and when I love it a lot, I make a lot of bookmarks, I underline, highlight when I love it a lot. But this book is not only filled with my highlights and notes, but it's also filled with my tears, my eyeliners, and my mascara, that I cried a lot when I'm reading this book. It was really touching to my soul.
I'm sorry.
We are all sorry that about what happened, what's happening. But I said in my channel earlier, sometimes bad things happen to good people, and bad things happen to good planet also. So I'm a little bit on acceptance side, but also grief, sadness. I share your grief as a deep lover of this planet. Thanks a lot for writing this.
Well, thank you for saying such nice things. Just to be clear, the original book was published in 2013, and the original publisher declared bankruptcy shortly thereafter. So I wanted to make the information in the book available to people. So, and there's no money in it. As anybody who's published a book knows, there's no money in it. I've published more than 15 books, and my royalties collectively total $10 or $15 a month. So nobody is writing books for the money unless there's somebody like Stephen King or an award-winning author who generates hundreds of thousands of dollars with every book. So the edition we are discussing today has experienced only cosmetic revisions compared to the original version. So there's no significant changes since the book was written and published in 2013. So written in 2012.
That's so beautiful.
I just want to clarify that for the audience, because I didn't know anything about aerosol masking, for example, back then. And I only knew about a relatively few self-reinforcing feedback loops at that point. So that's where this comes from.
Thank you, dear Guy McPherson. And about aerosol masking, you've been always so honest, open. There have been times that you also didn't consider as a huge impact. And then when you realized, you mentioned it with audience, and you didn't try to cover it up like many scientists know and ignore, unfortunately. I love your honesty. Thank you so much. And this book is called Going Dark, and somehow it's like going dark because we expect the modern civilization and industry turn off the lights, maybe soon even, because we are already having oil crisis, energy crisis, and so on, so many crises. This is literally going dark, maybe, turning off the lights, but also going dark with a huge grief. And we are all children of the modern civilization. We are all born into this, and we see that the modern civilization is going away and taking away many lives, including many species, and threatening many, many human lives, and more each day. This is because of my grief. I'm wearing black again. And is it going dark also because of your grief, the book title? And I would like to ask, if it's so, did you cope with your grief, and how is it for you right now?
It absolutely was. The title was selected because I was grieving. Yes, absolutely. And I should point out that the phrase "born into captivity" comes from my friend Timothy Scott Bennett, who, along with his partner, created the film Life at the End of Empire. I think that was the name of it, or perhaps that was the subtitle of it. Anyway, it's been out for quite a long time. So at Pauline's suggestion, I participated in the Grief Recovery Workshop in January 2014. It was created by the Grief Recovery Institute, and the workshop was critical to my understanding of grief and how to recover from it. Most importantly, I completed a series of exercises at the Grief Recovery Workshop. Pauline and I have subsequently recommended these exercises to many other people, and they can be found in the second 20-year edition of the Grief Recovery Handbook, which was published in 2009. That's really important. We have recommended it to many people, and I don't know anybody who has taken the time to track down a copy at the library or for the personal library of the Grief Recovery Handbook and complete those exercises. It was absolutely fundamental to my mental health to do that for myself. Importantly, the Grief Recovery Institute defines grief as wishing for a different past. Bear in mind that we cannot change the past. Rather, we must accept what has occurred. This is a fundamental step on the way to accepting our journey in life. Only after we have accepted the past can we begin accepting and potentially changing the nature of our relationships with other people and with the planet itself, with other organisms on the planet. Once I realized and accepted that I had been betrayed, dating back to my wife, now my ex, and members of my immediate family, the betrayal was widespread and began almost immediately. Only after I realized that betrayal and how to deal with it through grief recovery, meaning not focusing on changing the past, only then could I alter the nature of my relationships with these people. I could still love them, but I could no longer trust them. I could forgive them, which was important, but I could no longer rely on them for anything going forward. To answer your question, finally, I have accepted the past. As a result, I have recovered from the grief I experienced as a result of these relationships. I have changed the nature of many of these relationships, which has helped greatly in my path to accepting my life for what it is. And for me, this has been critically important. It was many years after the betrayals began from my immediate family before I even realized that the really good definition of grief is wishing for a different past, and I'm unable to change that past. So it was critically important for me. Otherwise, I would still be grieving those relationships. I would still be trying to patch up those relationships instead of just accepting them for what they are.
We cannot change the past, but we can have maybe different emotions for things happened if we go through the grief process and accept things as they are.
Absolutely. And I mean, I cannot stress how important this has been for my own emotional health and for the very few other people I've seen go through this process. It's simple, it's straightforward. You can read the book. You can probably read the book and those exercises in 3 or 4 hours, and then complete those exercises in a day. And it's been critically important, as I indicated, to my well-being. And it's been very useful, very helpful for Pauline as well. And, you know, at this point, there have been literally millions of people who have completed the Grief Recovery Workshop, and I never see a negative comment about it. I always instead see people indicating that the Grief Recovery Workshop and the exercises in the Grief Recovery Handbook have been very helpful for these people in their path towards emotional well-being.
In your book, you mentioned, you hear how, I also hear a lot how. We are different, we are special, we are so intelligent. We'll find a way out, we always do. Oh, we are humans, we are different than animals. And like all life, we are special. So we hear these words still every single day. Does it add to your grief, or you can now easily process such words from, let's say, deniers or people who do not want to understand the crisis.
I find it humorous. It's just another example of human hubris, that we can do anything. And, you know, when you look at the technology that we have created just within our lifetimes, just within your lifetime, it's amazing. It's truly, I don't think very many people 30, 40, 50 years ago would have correctly predicted the kind of technology that we have today. The ability to carry on this conversation, record it, and put it out there to the world, to almost anybody in the world at this point. That's amazing. And yet here we are in this most incredible of circumstances. And that comes with it grief, because this technology has contributed greatly to the demise of the living planet. And we have to accept that. But on the other hand, I'm not going to stop using my computer. I'm not going to stop driving my personal car because I understand the aerosol masking effect. And also I understand my minimal role in this greater society. And I think what we are doing here is important to the relatively few people who will watch.
Beautiful. Thank you, dear Guy. Thank you for your honesty, and thank you for sharing your heart. I would like to cite a specific paragraph in page 12 in my second edition. You said climate change is one of the 3 likely extinction events. I'm actually scared to ask you this question, but I'm also curious to ask you, what are the other extinction possibilities if climate change is not causing extinction?
Well, as it turns out, they're all related. So first, there's the ongoing destruction of the natural world on which we depend for our lives. After all, we are in the midst of a mass extinction event. Mm-hmm. As you and I have pointed out in a recent peer-reviewed paper published as part of the renowned Elsevier series. Gerardo Ceballos was the first person, the lead author of a paper published in the renowned journal Science Advances, part of the Science series, as the part of the AAAS in the United States. That paper was published on June 19th, 2015. He pointed out in an interview with BBC News, coincident upon release of the peer-reviewed paper, quote, "Life would take many millions of years to recover, and our species itself would likely disappear early on," end quote. That was, remember, that was 2015. Second, and so the demise of the natural world, the ongoing mass extinction event, which is almost certain to include the extinction of our species. That's the first one. The second one, there's the uncontrolled meltdown of the world's many nuclear facilities as humans walk away or go extinct. Mm-hmm. The results will be a loss of stratospheric ozone, which currently protects us from rapid sunburn. The 2021 film Finch, starring Tom Hanks, cleverly and subtly illustrates this phenomenon. I've discussed this issue in an essay and a video at guymcpherson.com posted on June 29th, 2021. And my blog post includes links to the relevant articles, the peer-reviewed articles, pointing to loss of stratospheric ozone that will lead to a rapid overheating of the planet.
I agree with you. Thank you, dear Guy. That's really so sad, but so real. We cannot change it. And in page 14, again, my second edition, you told that we are headed for extinction via nuclear meltdown. And you also mentioned that possibility of cascade meltdown events is possible. So I'm just trying to imagine how kind of meltdown would it be, how it would be triggered. Would it be triggered by extreme heat or loss of energy? And is it a cascade meltdown that I should imagine, like boom, 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 one after another, triggering each other? Or is it a cascade meltdown because one melts down and there's no power, energy, maybe 2 months later, another one melts down. So it is like 2 years long event altogether. So how we should imagine this? Can you a little bit make the picture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And many people don't understand this phenomenon very well. Also, because such an event has not happened yet here on Earth, we must rely upon similar events. That's what I did in the blog post I mentioned from June 29th, 2021. Stripping away of stratospheric ozone probably would be complete within a few months after many nuclear power plants imploded. Again, the 2021 film Finch has sunburn occurring in a matter of seconds, but that's undoubtedly an exaggeration. It likely would take a few minutes, not a few seconds. Once this occurs, habitat would be lost for our species and most others on Earth because it's such rapid heating. The resulting loss of aerosol masking as industrial civilization disappears would cause a rapid loss of habitat for all or nearly all species on Earth. This phenomenon is described, this phenomenon of co-extinctions and our codependencies among these many different species, described by Strona and Bradshaw in the renowned peer-reviewed journal Scientific Reports, which is part of the Nature series, on November 13th, 2018. In that paper, they discussed the importance of co-extinctions and also the rate of environmental change. The rate of environmental change is perhaps the most poorly understood phenomenon affecting climate change right now, much less the very rapid rate of change as industrial civilization slows or stops completely. So this is an open access journal, Scientific Reports. So anybody can read this important paper that is, again, in the November 13th, 2018 issue of Scientific Reports by Strona and Bradshaw. So I would strongly recommend it to anybody willing to take the time.
Part also. Thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you. I had a discussion about this with Frank, and he told me that maybe if there's a real danger, why don't they stop nuclear power plants themselves consciously? And I couldn't answer why they wouldn't stop. But on the other hand, I'm really hopeless because just at our doorstep, they are building 3 new ones. I mean, while they are making new ones, I don't expect them to stop the existing ones. And, you know, we are aiming to net zero 2030, 50. So we have to replace all the energy to clean, so-called. That's the purpose. And would there be possibility to just stop the nuclear power plants? Is there any, emergency brake like something?
Right. I wish we could just turn off a switch, like we can do at home. We can turn off the light switch and the lights go out, but it doesn't work that way. Pauline was recording a session in New York many years ago, and part of this made it into her 30-minute documentary film called Going Dark. And she asked a question at the very end. She asked it of a guy named Jasko, who was the most recent head of the American Nuclear Energy Organization. I can't remember the name of it. So she asked him, how long would it take to decommission a nuclear power plant? And he said 60. And then you could see that 60 was too long. So he said 60 or 50 years to safely decommission. Nobody says it that way. They say 50 or 60, but he realized the number was too big, that it was going to scare people. So he had to scale back a little bit. Well, so it takes at least 50 years to successfully decommission a nuclear power plant. We don't have 50 years left of civilization. We absolutely do not have that much time. And so I would love to think that we can do what we did at Chernobyl, for example. With many of those nuclear power stations, we can implement an emergency shutoff and then use concrete to seal what becomes the sarcophagus for the nuclear power plant. We can do that with many of them. Unfortunately, we can't do that for the ones that are near the ocean, such as Fukushima. Fukushima Daiichi was right on the ocean. They melt down and there's no solid ground to stop this. So you can't pour the concrete onto them. It just goes into the ocean.
Yeah.
So I would love to think that we can take this seriously. In fact, that's part of the idea of planetary hospice that Pauline and I have been talking about and writing about for many years, that we need to implement starting many years ago, is trying with emergency measures to decommission nuclear power plants. And then the way we treat each other is the other significant part of planetary hospice. But that's huge. If we want to retain the ability for life to persist on this planet, then we need to successfully decommission as many of those nuclear power facilities as we can.
I do agree with you. I do agree so much. And for people who are afraid of these topics that we are discussing, I will again address something from your book in page 50 in the second edition. Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside us while we live. So you always address live with urgency, live fully, live honest, live authentically. And we cannot say more, just time is relative and we can extend our lives only by living it fully every second.
You know, I think it was September, October of 2015 that I was on a speaking tour in Western Europe, and it covered 7 countries and I think 18 cities. So it was just a mad rush.
You've been to Amsterdam also, I think, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
I
absolutely.
wish I could see you that time. Big loss. Yeah.
So this was a long time ago, and I was pointing out the same information that we have an obligation to treat each other with decency, no matter how much time we have on the planet. Anyway, when I started that tour, the very beginning of the tour, or maybe right before I started the tour, the world's oldest human being at the time turned 117 years old. And she was asked to respond to the idea of her living 117 years. And she said, and I quote, "It seemed rather short."
Yeah.
117 years old. I can pretty much promise that nobody watching this is going to live to 117 years old, and that it will seem rather short. Our time here is short, no matter how we look at it.
It is. It is. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Carl Sagan had something to say about that too in his September 28th, 1980 book, Cosmos. For small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. Absolutely.
So beautiful. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Carl Sagan, who tried to share the truth so passionately, like you did. But yeah, nobody wanted to hear it, probably.
His work remains an inspiration to me. I think he was the best science educator in the history of this planet.
In your book, page 61, you say, people who want to know when the asteroid will strike cannot fathom that other people do not want to know. People who do not want to know the asteroid is headed our way cannot fathom why anybody would want to know. We cannot force people to know some reason. We cannot make them open their eyes, and people who know trying to say asteroid is coming, and people who do not want to know why and don't understand why we struggle to give the message.
Here's a funny story. Here's a funny story. I was speaking in California on the West Coast of the United States many years ago, and one of the young women in the audience caught a taxi cab to take her home. This is before the days of Uber, and so it was an expensive cab ride. And she was so affected by my presentation that she started telling the taxi driver all the details about communication. And he stopped and threw her out of the cab. He says, "I'm not taking you any further. Get out." And so that's real consequences. I can understand why people don't want to talk about it. You
I can imagine. Yeah, that happens to all of us who understand the truth. Some people in our lives just stop, like the taxi driver, say, "Go,
Right.
go away.
I don't want to have anything to
cannot
do
hear
with
this
you."
anymore." That's so true. That happens. Again, I will turn back to your book. You mentioned, I think I hope I pronounced correctly, Jared Diamond's book. And he was writing about societies choose to fail or succeed. So you were mentioning his book, and I started to think about, do really societies choose fail and succeed? And did we choose to fail, or could we choose to succeed? How do you explain this?
Well, in this book, Diamond, who is a genius, it's amazing the kind of work he has done. He was an internist, a medical doctor who became interested in ecology, and shortly thereafter he was one of the most renowned ecologists in the world. And then he changed paths again and became an archaeologist / anthropologist. And that's what he's doing in the book Collapse. So in this book, Diamond describes various choices societies make that lead to their collapse or success. These include, for example, environmental damage, climate change, globalization, rapid population growth, and unwise political choices. These were all factors in the demise of societies around the world, but some societies found solutions and persisted, and that's what he points out. He takes the long view and looks at these various societies, some of which have failed because of these 5 factors or some combination of these 5 factors. We are clearly headed for the collapse of this society on every one of these issues. Environmental damage, as indicated by the ongoing mass extinction event, climate change, which is proceeding very rapidly, globalization, which we all know has our society completely interconnected. So if a domino falls in Malaysia, it's going to affect all of us in the United States and Western Europe and so on. Globalization, rapid population growth continues despite thousands of warnings throughout history, and unwise political choices. I haven't seen very many wise political choices in my life. And we continue with the unwise political choices at a very rapid rate.
It is. And in your book, you asked, and I cried a lot after reading that short question. You asked probably that question to yourself, not to get an answer, but maybe you just put a question to your soul, to universe, whatever we want to call. In page 46, you asked, is it possible for a scientist to die from a broken heart? I cried a lot for this question that you asked to yourself. And then in page 38, you said, awareness is not nirvana, rather it is hell. So after also being labeled, judged, blamed as crazy, insane doomer, after losing so many things, people, and we all went through this, you and I, and many people too. We do know that awareness is hell, indeed, is not nirvana. Some of us in the same path with you, we understand. So I wish to ask you, how do you practice let go, mindfulness, And how can we live with our broken hearts?
Right. So I referred just a few minutes ago to the ability to recover from grief. That's a process that is critically important and rarely pursued. I have recommended this idea to many people, and I don't know anybody who has read the Grief Recovery Handbook and completed the exercises. Counselors and therapists depend upon keeping us grieving to earn money for themselves. They convince us that there is no potential for recovery by using Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's approach and the attendant 5 stages of grief. According to this model, there is no potential for recovery. An example from that workshop I completed in January 2014, more than 8 years ago. If you have a painful splinter in your finger, you must address it, right? You must get a pair of tweezers out, sometimes have to dig at it a little bit because it goes deeper than the surface. And that increases the pain in the short term. It might even cause you to bleed. You might need to clean the wound. You might need to use an antibiotic or alcohol to ensure the pain does not continue long into the future. But what if the painful splinter is not in your finger? What if it's in your heart? What if the pain is emotional instead of physical? You still might have to dig at it. You still might have to increase the pain in the short term to make sure you address the problem in the long term. You might have to suffer for a few hours or a few days while you're reading the exercises in the Grief Recovery Handbook, for example, to make sure that your long-term suffering is alleviated. You might have to actually withstand some pain, physical or emotional, in the short term. The idea of letting go applies to the events over which I have no control, the events and the people.
Yeah.
So I attempt to practice modern Stoicism. A few phrases come to mind. Memento mori, you too will die. My cell phone reminds me every day how to respond. Every day my cell phone gives me the same message. Amor fati, love your fate. I too will die. Amor fati, love my fate. Loving your fate is challenging on many levels, and for most days, at least for me. Still, I see that message from my stupid cell phone 10 times a day, reminding me to love my fate. And it's an important reminder that accepting events over which we have no control is necessary for our emotional well-being. So I continue to try to pursue that path, recognizing that some days it's nearly impossible.
Memento mori, we are all deathly here for a short time, and amor fati. So as I also mentioned, bad things happen to good people, bad things happen to good planet too. Acceptance and forgiving things that we cannot change. It's not that we do not care, but it's because we love so much that we want to send our love, not negative emotions anymore. We want to live the best we can when we can.
Right. My online acquaintance and sometimes supporter, Bill Eddy, points out what he calls the McPherson paradox, that increasing industrial activity drives us to extinction, obviously, because we will lose habitat. Decreased industrial activity also causes a warming of the planet due to loss of aerosol masking.
Yeah.
So if you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, and we are all going to die, memento mori, then at the very least, we can accept our fate and we can treat people today with decency. And among the people we can treat with decency today is ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't have to beat ourselves up every day because we're not a minimalist, because we eat low on the food chain, or sometimes we go out and we don't eat low on the food chain. We have a $40 meal instead. We don't have to beat ourselves up for that. Memento mori, amor fati.
Beautiful reminders. Again, in the book, page 48 in my second edition, you said human survival requires a heart, and a brain. So what do you mean for people who born into this modern civilization, which is, to me, virtually collapsed, but we live the last bits probably. What does it mean, human survival? And what does it mean, collaboration of heart and brain?
As Pauline and I have administered our Only Love Remains workshop during the last several years, it has become obvious that different people have different values. Well, of course they do. Some of us love the natural world. You and I are in that category, and all of the species within it. Others couldn't care less about lions and spiders, but they are deeply moved by works of art and other outcomes of civilization. I understand. I have been similarly affected by great works of art and music. We are on the verge of losing it all. Due to the loss of aerosol masking, when civilization disappears or declines, we will lose habitat for all life on Earth. As Gerardo Ceballos said more than 6.5 years ago, our species itself would likely disappear early on. A paper in the renowned series of annual reviews, specifically in the 2012 issue of the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences, projected, and this is an important word here, projected an ice-free Arctic Ocean in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. And here we are, 2022, we haven't had that ice-free Arctic Ocean yet. The exceedingly rapid rate of environmental change in the wake of such an event, when it does occur, will cause an almost immediate loss of habitat for our species, and therefore for all life on Earth, for the reasons I already talked about. Fortunately, we got lucky. Earth has not experienced an ice-free Arctic Ocean since the first civilizations arose several thousand years ago. In addition, we received additional good news on April 6th of this year. The first ice-free Arctic Ocean in history is extremely unlikely for this year. We have been granted another year with habitat for our species on Earth, at least with respect to the Arctic ice situation. So this is amazing and leads me to be grateful for yet another day and probably for another year with ice floating on the Arctic Ocean and providing all that albedo or reflectance that keeps the planet relatively cool.
I understand, and probably people who are watching it now are celebrating it, that you expect not blue ocean event this year. And to my side, I'm still suspicious, so I'm keeping silent, even though I trust on your experience a lot. I do not have experience of predictions myself.
Well, this is a forecast called the 6-month ensemble forecast from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. So anybody can look that up. You can use a search engine and type in Naval Postgraduate School 6-month ensemble prediction or ensemble forecast, and it'll take you right to it. And it indicates that we'll have at least 4 million square kilometers of ice at a minimum for late September of this year. And so that doesn't even get us in the category of the lowest ice level so far, which I think was in 2012. So we're not even coming close to that, which is great news. You know, I mentioned a couple of renowned scientists who have indicated that they expect an ice-free Arctic next year. James Anderson from Harvard and Jennifer McKinnon from the Scripps Institution and also the University of California, San Diego, both expect an ice-free Arctic next year, but that's next year. There's many opportunities to be grateful between now and then. Yeah,
I always feel like you share a little bit similar fate with Paul Ehrlich. He made a prediction of population overgrowth and therefore not having enough food earlier, collapse of the civilization, and that didn't happen that time, and everybody shamed him that he didn't do good prediction. But now we see that our market shelves are empty. not only because overshoot, but also because of the climate crisis, which became worse and worse during this time. So it's like you also made earlier a prediction, I'm guessing, which was earlier date, and then people said, oh, Guy McPherson didn't guess correct. And you also shared similar fate, I think, in that sense. But in the meantime, things maybe became even worse, like what happens to Paul
Right.
Ehrlich, I'm assuming.
Right. Well, actually, Paul Ehrlich didn't predict those events to happen in the 1970s. He said they could happen if we continue on the same track. He failed to foresee the agricultural revolution that occurred in the 1970s. And I certainly appreciate his perspective, because I have been correct. I have been, sorry, incorrect. I have wrongly predicted the demise of civilization. And it's not fun to be, obviously it's not fun to be incorrect about that kind of prediction. However, now that I know what comes with the loss of civilization, the loss of aerosol masking and the rapid overheating, I'm glad I was wrong. It's a good thing for me and for everybody else. I can understand when people are reluctant to listen to me after things like that happen. That's perfectly understandable.
Your honesty.
I was wrong.
That scientist honesty is the most appreciable thing. But Paul Ehrlich was wrong, because he didn't see the revolution in agriculture. And now people are talking about revolution in energy, revolution in making geoengineering and stuff. Here in pages 106, 107, 108, 9, you made a long story about renewable energy resources, recycling, making power plants, and using hydrogen, for instance. And you addressed what would that lead us, and that would be still be the solution. They still lead us to the same ending, going dark. And especially you address, which is a very big hype these days, hydrogen usage. And Heidenberg said, for instance, you quoted in your book here, the hype about hydrogen is extreme and extremely ridiculous. So I do also agree, but I cannot explain, because it's not my expertise. How would you explain why these 5 pillars you mentioned, all these potential revolutions, do not just switch this ending to bright instead of dark?
Right. Well, there's a wonderful book called The Hype About Hydrogen. And it was written many years ago. And it points out that hydrogen is a carrier. It's not a source of energy, it's a carrier of energy. And for example, to power a car the size of a Prius, say a very small car, would require the equivalent of an 18-wheeler capacity of hydrogen. It would take that much hydrogen to get that little tiny car to go 50 miles or a relatively few kilometers. So it's ridiculous that we point to a carrier, not a source of energy, and call it a source. And then when we figure out how much hydrogen is involved, it becomes even more ridiculous. But all this is rooted in the demand, the expectation that we will always have electricity. That's one of the factors driving us to extinction. The very idea that we need each new technology that arises within civilization is severely problematic. And yet this is exactly what we do. A cell phone was a near miracle when it appeared in 1983, nearly 40 years ago. The first smartphone showed up about 9 years later in 1992. And yet 30 years later, every civilized person on Earth demands the latest cell phone technology and 24-hour access to the internet, of course, and so on. We each deserve everything in a world where everything is disappearing. Infinite growth on a finite planet has become an expectation. not an impossible feat as we knew it was in the 1960s, based on the work of people like Garrett Hardin and Paul Ehrlich, for example. Personally, knowing what I know about avoiding an ice-free Arctic Ocean so far, and many other events that could drive us to extinction, I'm grateful for every day I'm alive. None of us was guaranteed this day. None of us. Carpe diem. Seize the day. Or as I like to say, carpe pressum. When I was flying to Europe, those many years ago for that speaking tour, I didn't have any kind of cellular telephone at that point. And I didn't have anything to write down. So early in the flight, I came up with this idea of carpe pressum. But I didn't know the word carpe pressum. I just knew that I wanted to squeeze the day, to squeeze all the life out of every day. And so I had to remember to look it up when I got on the ground. That's carpe pressum. You don't know if you're going to get another day. Squeeze the life out of every day.
Squeeze every day. So beautiful.
And I know that every generation was screwed by every previous generation. Living as if there is no tomorrow has assured, as expected, that at some point there is no tomorrow. That day draws near, but it's not here yet. Carpe pressum. Squeeze the day.
Greatest wisdom. I just cut off here because it's the greatest message that people should take away. Thank you so much, dear Guy McPherson, again for your great time. And this book is not much cost. I really recommend anyone to get the book. And probably I will read again soon. But there's also a poem that you've written for the Mother Earth. It like addressing the Mother Earth as she, a lady that you miss a lot, that we are losing from our hands. And I read the poem a lot, several times. I cried and cried and cried. I tried to record my poem reading to make a video with your permission, but I couldn't have a recording which I'm not crying, so that I will try again. Hopefully one time I will succeed.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this conversation. I appreciate the path that you are on, that you're trying to come to grips with your short life, even shorter than mine, both of us much shorter than that woman who lived 117 years. By the way, it was just a couple of weeks after she said it seemed rather short that she died.
Yeah.
So she really put a punctuation mark on her own message.
My life is shorter, obviously, but I believe in just relativity. My life became so much longer by knowing you, and other people entered to my life who understand and accept the truth, believe in living the day, just squeezing the day, living in honesty. I think I really appreciate that I've got fulfilling life. That's the most important. Thank you so much, dear Guy McPherson.
You and I have lived in the most privileged time, I think, in history.
Yes.
We have access to all this technology. We can have food delivered to our doorstep.
Yeah.
We are not wealthy people, and yet we can have food come to our house. That used to, it wasn't that many years ago that was for the really wealthy people.
Yeah. Just from an app, we can just make it happen. That's
right. It's amazing. It's amazing. We get another day.
We forget to appreciate things. We just click the button, lights on, we switch the tab and the water comes. These are very big things in reality.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your wisdom, dear Guy McPherson. I wish you all the best with Pauline, for all the things that you do together. You changed my life and lives of many people. Thanks for all the work you do, all the love and honesty you share.
Thank you. Thank you for saying those things. It's a pleasure to speak with you, as always.
Thank you so much. So see you next time.
Okay.